With such a huge amount of amazing classical piano pieces to choose from, it can be really difficult for someone in the beginner phase to know what to learn. It has to be something that you like, obviously, but it also has to be that right level of challenge for you, and a lot of classical music can be quite advanced. So I've picked 4 famous pieces that I think you'll recognise. None of these pieces sound beginnery at all, and I actually teach these myself in lessons to beginners. I found these to always really help students progress with a few elements of their playing, teach them some core underlying skills and techniques, which they can then apply to all different kinds of piano music, and helps give them a foundation to learn more difficult stuff in the future. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one and what you'll get from learning them. And the other good thing about these pieces for beginners is that they all still sound really good at slightly slower tempos. And just before we get into it, I want to be super clear about the word beginner here. I'm using it to label someone in that broader beginner phase, not someone who's just started yesterday. If you have started very recently, these are some of the things that you can aim towards soon, but of course you're going to still need some basics under your fingers first, and perhaps have gone through some beginner exercises and really short pieces specifically designed for beginners, the kind of thing that you might find in beginner books and things like that. Let me know in the comments, what are some of your favourite pieces of classical piano, beginner or not, that one day you would love to be able to play. Okay, this is piece number 1. This piece is essentially made up of these broken chord patterns played between the hands, which takes us through this amazing evolving chord progression. The great thing is that apart from the very end part, once you've got this pattern under your fingers, you've gotten to grips with the flow of it, the way the fingers ripple from low to high, left to right, and then again from the bottom of the right hand. So even though you'll be changing fingers on different chords, the direction is always the same. Once you know the new chord and you know the new notes, the position, it's going to feel much easier to keep repeating that pattern as it's not moving around differently, which is where things can sometimes feel harder to memorize or harder to read. Different things can make different pieces feel hard, and of course the challenge here is that there's lots of chord positions to learn. But that's why this piece is great, because you can challenge that more mental side of things, handling all those positions and taking on all that information whilst not having something that's too technically demanding or fiddly to play. And for that same reason, it's a really great opportunity to work more on your musicality. You can work on your phrasing, so how you're shaping the sound of each chord. The chord changes are all fairly close movements, so it's not too challenging in terms of leaping around the piano. And you can work on your pedaling here too, because the pedal doesn't need to keep changing so quickly. And because you don't have to play this piece too fast and you've got a whole bar per chord, that gives you plenty of thinking time to think ahead about what chord's coming up next, which makes it feel a little bit easier. It's good to work on your reading skills to notice interval leaps and common chord positions we use. And whether you're reading or not, this is a great time to spot loads of triads and seventh chords and the notes from those chords being spread out in different ways on the piano. You don't have to do that, but recognizing those kind of things and getting familiar with them helps you learn stuff quicker. You can get to grips with learning the sequence of chords by really thinking about how each one morphs shape from one to the next. So for example, just the first chord to the second chord. The first chord is a C major. And then to the second chord, we can think about how it morphs by lowering the thumb in the left hand. And then the right hand shape just moves up. So we take the whole second inversion shape and then we move it up. And you can spot how the patterns shift on the sheet music too, which helps you read more efficiently. Even though it may feel like there's quite a lot to get through with this piece, it really does lend itself to being learnt in chunks of a few bars at a time, which makes it feel much more manageable. You can do it at your own pace, and as long as you're consistent, you'll have the whole thing before you know it. This is piece number 2. This piece is a really good challenge in a very different way from the last piece, and it's a really important hand coordination workout for anyone learning piano. Each hand has much more intricate parts to play, so it's really good for pushing that kind of skill, that kind of control over much closer melodic finger movement. It will feel a little more complex to learn just in terms of how much there is, because there's always something different happening. And then of course the way the hands interact is a bit more involved. They're constantly moving in different directions. So like I say, it's a good chance to work on that skill. It is a challenge, but don't be put off, because it's a really important thing to work at to learn piano, and it's very manageable when you learn in these bite-sized chunks and slowly piece it together. I found that by the time students get to the end of learning this piece, they've made so much progress in terms of being able to handle stuff like this, where they have independent moving parts in each hand, and just their general ability and confidence playing hands together really improves. It starts to feel much clearer and easier. Something intricate like this really teaches you how to use your fingers in clever ways as well, and to be really precise with your fingerings. Remember, good fingering sets us up to reach other things easily and helps us move around fluidly. And it's a good left hand workout too. There's plenty for the left hand to do, and there's a few faster moments as well. There's also a couple of types of what we call ornaments we can add in a few places to decorate the melody. But the thing is, you don't have to play them. It sounds great without, or you can just learn it without and then add them at a later date. So instead of just playing this, if we added this ornament, it would be... Once you have it down, there's lots of room to work on how you shape the melody as well and control the dynamics here too. And it sounds great on harpsichord too. The next piece is Fur Release, but I want to stress that it's a slightly shorter version of this that's suitable for beginners, which does include the famous parts that you'll recognise. The other parts are not very beginner friendly, but don't feel like this is cheating. A lot of people learn this version. Obviously, this piece might be a little bit overplayed and maybe a bit of a cliche piano thing, but I still really like to teach it. Mainly just because I think it's really beneficial for students. It's a really suitable piece in a comfortable key to develop the kind of technique that this piece uses. But also, it's just one of those pieces that everyone learns at some point. Because we have parts again that flow from hand to hand, it's much more straightforward to get how things are meant to fit together between the hands compared to like minuet and G. And there's a much simpler chord progression framing this piece, much simpler than like Prelude in C. So there's not as many chords to learn, not as many new positions to learn, not as many different moving and ever-changing parts to navigate. And because that side of things isn't so hard, that's what makes it such a good opportunity to work on some other aspects of your playing. So for example, this takes place over a much wider area of the piano, using more spread out positions. So now we can get used to coordinating and controlling that kind of nice relaxed arm movement. Just looking at the left hand, you'll use a couple of really common positions and ways to break up the notes of a chord we commonly use. We have roots, fifths, and octaves. And then some chords where you'll learn a common technique where we cross over like this. Here I'm playing the root, the octave, and then the third of the chord over the top. If you don't know what that means, don't worry at the sec, but the point is that this crossing over technique is very common in left-hand parts to play wider broken chords. It happens on the E chord in the first part too, and it's a good time to practice this, get used to it, when it only happens a couple of times and it's spread out in the piece. It's a good time to practice these nice relaxed hand gestures using the pedal as well as we change these chords. So I'm lifting up and moving from chord to chord. We have to get used to making these bigger leaps and then continuing the flow in this direction. But as I said, it's a great time to learn it when it's only a short chord progression. The right hand uses some wider positions too, so we can learn to navigate those without keeping our hands stiff and spread out the whole time. And because the hands keep flowing from one to the other, right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand, that makes it much easier to learn in steps and gradually getting further just by adding on one new bit each time. This piece is also perfect to work on playing expressively, controlling our dynamics, the pedal work too, and also playing with a bit of rubato. Rubato is kind of like a nice controlled musical manipulation of the tempo. Okay, this is the last piece on the list. Now this piece probably is a little more technically challenging than the others, I would say, but again in a very different way. And remember, that's always a relative thing. Something new, a new kind of technique that you haven't used before, is always going to feel unfamiliar and therefore a bit more difficult. But the great thing is that this piece is a really good place to improve your technique in that kind of way, because it's so short and it's such a comfortable tempo that if you learn it step by step and learn it thoroughly, that it feels very manageable. And then next time you encounter this kind of technique on the piano, it's going to feel more familiar. So this piece uses a left hand technique that's really common in all types of music, new and old, where we leap from a low bass note up to a chord position. It's a really great thing to get used to because it provides a nice low end, it provides the harmony, and it provides the rhythm whilst leaving the right hand free to do other stuff. You'll also get used to some different ways of playing the same chord, some different chord voicings. It's in A major, so again, it's a short piece to start practicing learning in a new key or reading in a new key. Probably best to learn the A major scale and get used to that key signature first. And there is a few accidentals to watch out for, notes that go outside of the scale. In the right hand, there are some moments that might feel a bit trickier. We now have two notes a lot of the time moving in harmony in quite a few spots. So we have to be very precise with our hand positioning and our movement, keeping that nice and relaxed, and our fingering. Remember to learn things like that really slow and precise. But with that or anything else that feels tricky about this piece, again, because it's so short, it doesn't feel too overwhelming. So it's a really good time to push those skills and tackle something new so you start to get used to it. If you want to learn pieces like these or anything else faster, become a better musician and memorize things more solidly, then I've got 6 tips to help you do that in this video you should watch next. And click subscribe so you don't miss out on any other helpful piano learning videos. Thanks for watching.